You mentioned this last week that you were learning about or heard about this thing called the time spent delusion. So why don't you first explain kind of what that is and your thoughts about how that kind of applies to what we're talking about here? Because I think this is actually a huge thing that people are unaware of. And I think kind of explaining it the way that you've been talking to me about it a little bit will give people a little bit of a different perspective on development, whatever that means, or their training or whatever, you know?
Yeah, no, it was just it's interesting, and it's like then I was thinking like I really liked the concept of this, and then it's from a wrestling coach, and he just said the time spent delusion is basically what you think, where you think you've spent your time, did you actually? So I was listening to this coach speaking, and so let me go back a little bit. So I think I've said this on podcasts before. When parents talk a lot of the times, myself, I'm a parent, or when hockey players talk a lot of the time, or we look at our kids doing things, what I hear a lot is like back when I was a kid, all we did was shoot pucks. And I call bullshit on a lot of it. When I was a kid, all I did, like, and I'll say that when I was a kid, all I remember doing is playing sports. That's it. It's like that's all I like. You did other things, right? You caught the fish this big, but actually it was only that big, right? So I think the further you get away from the time, the more you did, and the more you can kind of forget what you didn't do, right? You don't like to remember the times you were lazy. You don't like to remember the times where you didn't put in full effort, or you practiced, but it's not as much as you thought, right? So when we look at this time spent delusion, it's like, okay, how much time as an adult, if you look back, if you actually look at the time that you put into your craft and your effort, did you really put in as much as you think? So, okay, that's one. But as a wrestling coach was saying, he goes, there's a delusion of how much time you actually can put into your skill. So he said, so if you're a wrestler, just like hockey, it's a very intense sport. It's not a sport that you can do for hours and hours and hours and hours intensely. Because if you did, you can't spend all day playing hockey every day, because if you did, you'd
die.
Yeah, you'd die. Yeah, you'd die, or you'd
be dead.
Yeah, or you'd be too skinny to walk. Like, like there's only a certain amount of time that you can do, and a certain amount you can do intensely, right? So he's saying this is the same in wrestling. He goes, so a lot of people think that, like all they do is wrestle. It's like, well, you can't. He goes, like, basically, if you wrestle, you to be quality, let's say you could do 3 mornings a week plus your afternoon stuff. So he goes, you wrestle for an hour, and in that wrestling session, he goes, you can't wrestle by yourself. So that hour actually is, if you divide it up, you wrestle me, I wrestle you, doing a skill, right? So let's say we're doing takedowns or something like that. So I get 30 minutes, you get 30 minutes. That's if we're doing it for a full 30 minutes. That's if we don't grab a water. That's if we don't get coaching inside. So when you say that you did an hour of work, it might have been 30 minutes. That 30 minutes might only be 20. It might only be 15 of actually doing the work. So what he was saying is like, so you start multiplying that, and over a month, over 6 months, he goes, what you think you did 6 months of work, it's actually might only be 12 days, right? And he said where the frustration part comes in with some of his students is like he'll be working a takedown. Takedown is like, okay, we've done this like for 2 weeks in a row. He goes, I got it. He goes, no, you don't have it. You haven't done it enough. And that's the delusion of thinking that all we've done is takedowns for 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever it was. And like, I've got it. It's like, no, you're only touching it. So like when we look at the hockey training, or however we want to describe that, right? We can say, let's talk about, let's do the same thing. You go 1 or 2 private lessons, and this would be extreme, I think, or 3 private lessons in a week, or not private, like small groups in the morning sessions, outside
like skill
of your hockey
stuff or whatever. Yeah,
focused on skill. Okay, so now you got to look at, is a coach smart enough to actually spend time on one thing long enough? How many guys are on the ice? How much time are you actually doing the skill? So that hour of ice of real time doing the skill might or might not. Like, as you separate, if there's 5 guys or 10 guys or 15 guys or 3 guys, the teaching, the setup, the actual doing of the drill, the resting. What does that hour actually entail of actually work spent? So at the end of the day, you might say I spent an hour on the ice. Well, I worked this skill for an hour, but the hour is not really an hour. It might be 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 7, right? So it's no wonder it takes so long for someone to master a skill, right? So then on the other side, it's like, it's good that you're doing it, but then doesn't it make more sense now to spend time on your own doing it? And that's where I think the real benefits come from is now you can kind of measure more. I shot pucks for 1 hour, right? That's actual time.
So just let me
So I know I
chime
went
in.
all over and I got so much to think about here.
No, it's all interesting stuff, and we're just kind of like throwing shit out there because it's cool to talk about. That's why I like the off the cuff, because we kind of just like go all over the place and see if we can tie it all in at the end or whatever. So like numbers guy again, let's do like a little bit of math. So let's say we're 3 times a week, 3 mornings a week, you're doing skill stuff as an example. I'm gonna use like the most extreme version of this that I can, let's say, just to paint the picture. So how would you describe that if someone asks you, how often are you doing skills? You would say 3 times a week. Okay, it's not 3 times a week, it's 3 hours a week, right? So first of all, if you say 3 times a week, it already makes it sound like it's more than it is. It's actually 3 hours a week, which is not that much to begin with. Okay, of the 3 hours, to your point, maybe it's only, if it's something like wrestling where you need another person, it's actually 30-30, right? 30 for you, 30 for your partner. Okay, so now it's only an hour and a half a week. Okay, of that hour and a half, so 30 minutes per session, maybe 10 of those 30 minutes is the coach actually instructing the skill or talking to you about what we're going to do, right? So now it's only 20 minutes. So now we're at 1 hour of actually doing the drilling, right? And then in that 1 hour, how much of that time do you need to stop to rest? How much of that time do you need to stop to get a drink? How much of that time were you distracted and not actually focused? So
How much was intense?
How much was intense, right? So of that 3 times a week, we can actually boil that down to 60 minutes or less if I'm being as like the least amount charitable possible, right? So you describe it as, yeah, I do skills sessions 3 times a week. It's actually, no, you do 60 minutes or less per week of skill work. That's what you do if you don't do anything more than that, So when you're working on, exactly to your point, is just when you're working on skills or you're trying to do things that make your skills better, you have to know that or be honest about that. Now, my second part of that is when the younger you are, the less you are able to focus on one thing, right? So you mentioned at the end there, is the skills coach smart enough to do one skill or one activity or one action or one movement for long enough? And when you're younger, that's harder to do because what does it take to focus intensely for a long period of time? You have to be able to, in your mind, say, okay, if I do this now, I will see no payoff for the next 3 months. But in 3 months, I'll be much better at this skill, which I will then be able to use in my performance, which then will make me better, which then will make me more valuable to a scout or a coach or whatever, which then increases my chances of going off to a higher level. Like, what kid can do that?
Well, that's why, from a coaching side, that's what I'm saying. Like, so if we look at that time spent, so a lot of people would be, okay, the extra skills is good, and it is. It might be. It depends on the quality of the ice too. But let's just say if you did your own skill stuff all by yourself, might be better than a coach because you're working on one thing or two. Now, if you have a skills coach, then you're out there and he's just doing what he wants to do for a group of 3 or whatever, or a group of 10, it might not be even beneficial. Not beneficial, but might not be the best spent time, and you might not be touching a skill enough. And is the skills coach doing it to keep you interested to keep coming back, or is he saying, no, Eric, we're going to work on this. Your passing is not very good, or a group of guys, your passing is not very good. We're going to be working on passing for the next 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. So you can sit there passing. That's boring. Now, it doesn't have to be passing. There could be multiple things to do within passing in the skills, but can you stick to it for long enough to actually start to see the improvement of passing, right? Or skating, like you have to stick to it. So like if you go to a stick handling class or shooting camp once a week, Okay, let's do a shooting camp. Okay, do a shooting camp, and let's say there's 15 to 20 kids there. Well, that you're not shooting for an hour. You're shooting for after the instruction, after the drill setups. You cannot shoot pucks hard for 1 minute straight. So it's like in an hour and a half shooting session, how much are you getting? So, anyways, to get the benefit of that, you need repetitions. You need, if you're going to a camp, you're looking for some tweaking or some coaching. So you need that. So you got to ask, how much tweaking and coaching am I getting? Hopefully, it's correct teaching and coaching. And so, like in a hour session, like how much are you actually doing? So that's why it's important to do the time spent on your own to do the other things, right? So looking at it from a investment, it's like, okay, is it the best thing to do? Maybe there's better ways of spending my money or time. Like we did. So the team, your team, I have a lot of those guys out in the mornings, and that was one of the things I recognized with them. Like there's a lot of deficiencies, but I was looking at them. Okay, we could do skill development, like the traditional pylons and stick handle and all that stuff, and that's fine. That's going to be included. But like I made a commitment to myself with them for at least a few weeks that we're going to work on passing because it's not good at all.
It is not good at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So we spent time, and I kept telling them we're going to be doing this because in order to be a team that can compete with anybody when you have the puck, you have to be able to move it properly and all that stuff. So it's getting better, but it's been 2.5, 3 weeks, and that's starting to see some difference. So now, to not keep it boring, sorry to keep going here, but to keep a skill boring, doesn't have to be the exact same thing all the time. It can be many variations of that skill, right? So you can do stationary, you can do follow your passing, you can do, D to D ups, you can do all kinds of different flow drills or whatever, but simple passing drills and stuff. But you need to spend time on it. And I've noticed after 3 weeks, now it's starting to get, it's not exceptional. But then here's the next thing, time spent. Now so this is like that military term, slow, smooth, fast, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, slow, smooth is fast.
Yeah, smooth is fast. So like I was doing some skill this morning with some kids. I did a lot of stick handling with the younger guys. And a lot of them want to skip the slow part because they don't see the benefit of it. But it's like, slow it down. Let's get the mechanics right. So you might do that. Like if you spend a good quality time on the slow to get smooth, now you've got some movement. So let's say you're getting it almost mastered. Now can you do it fast? So it's like, all my point is, it takes a heck of a long time to get things to a point where you can say he's really good at that.
Yeah, and so my point on this was when we're talking about youth hockey and kids and training kids. So like for these U18 kids and with the junior A club you're working with, these guys are old enough where they have the brain power, they have the brain development to understand delayed gratification a little bit more. Where it's like, if I do this boring shit for the next hour today, it will help me later. Because their primary goal is not, I want to have the most amount of fun right now. That's a mature mindset. So when you're training young kids, exactly to your point of it takes time, because I can't just do passing every skill session for 4 straight weeks the way that I could do it with an older group, because the young kids will lose their shit and they'll go nuts. Even if I'm the best coach ever, if I'm the best instructor, I relate to the kids the best. They all love listening to me. At the end of the day, they're going to go ape shit if we're doing the exact same thing over and over, because they do not have the brain development to properly understand delayed gratification yet. The younger they are, the more true that is. So for all the this is more for the parents now, even for the coaches, but for parents as well. It's like when you're talking about what does my kid need, what can my kid actually absorb, digest, and get better at, you have to have patience, man. You have to have patience. And the problem that I see is they try to layer more and more and more for the sake of volume rather than making what they're doing more quality. And this, again, to your point, it's like, how much more do we need to do when we know that there's inherent limitations on how much time they can actually spend, and on the amount of time, energy, resources that we have to put into this thing. So I see an infinite number of skates that kids go to per week. It's like they're on the ice 7, 8, 9 times, you know? So it's like not only do they have the inherent limitation of not being able to focus on one skill to get better over time, but now even in their time on the ice, they're not going to focus as much because they just have another skate. They just have another ice session. They have whatever, and they're not really thinking too much about it.
That's so apparent to me now.
Yeah, huge.
Like over the last few years, I just like the more and more ice that the players get, thinking that more is better. It's okay. Let's say it's better for volume, but that intensity and the focus just keeps dropping and dropping. Like I watch some of the kids come out, and these are good players, come out on a morning skate or an evening skate, and it's like they're here, but they're not here. They work hard, but it's not work really hard, like and focused work.
So like if we do the math on that, let's say over a 2-week stretch, let's say you're on the ice 5 times every week now. So you have 10 sessions in 2 weeks, and we do this same math where of that, maybe you're getting 60 to 90 to 2 hours worth of actual time doing the skill over those 10 sessions. Well, now that 2 hours that you're getting is going to be decreasing. So now instead of getting a quality 2 hours, maybe now you're only getting 90 minutes because in that 2 hours now you're not as focused because it's just another session, or you're finishing your drill and you're just saucing it at the goalie because I don't feel like shooting hard this time, or whatever.
You're brain dead.
So it's not only could it be that you're not developing new better habits, but you're actively getting worse habits just because you don't feel like trying as hard because I'm tired from my skate last night. I'm tired I had 3 games this weekend and it's Monday morning and I have to go on the ice again today. And I don't really want to be here that much, So these are all things that it's so hard to grill into parents' heads, like the reality of what it's like being the ones training these kids, being the ones that are with these kids on the ice, seeing how they are doing the drills, how they are in terms of their attitude, their demeanor, their body language, their energy level, and all of those things. It's very, very hard when you're not the one on the ice training the kids to understand what it actually looks like and what it actually is. Because things can sound great on paper. Things can sound great when you make a plan that you're going to do all this stuff. But, I mean, if you're a parent and you try to make a plan for yourself, the odds that you actually stick to that plan with the highest quality is probably pretty low.
Yeah, it's hard to get.